I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Rihanna Meinzer, Research Officer in the Clinical Epidemiology and Biostatistics Unit at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. I'm hoping that there's some acronyms somewhere in that. Today, she'll be sharing her experience navigating the transition from PhD student to biostatistician. She'll be shedding light on the day-to-day activities of a postdoc, both within a university environment as well as a research institute, as well as describe some of the lessons she has learned along the way. And I'll give an extra plug that says that this ties in perfectly with us having had the very first International Day for Women in Statistics and Data Science, which took place on the 11th of October, which had the aim of increasing diversity, inclusion, and equity within the stats and data science space. So I'll pass it over to you, Rihanna.
Thanks very much, Rory. And thank you for inviting me here today. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our land in Australia. So in the spirit of reconciliation, on behalf of the Statistical Society of Australia, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. And I'm going to share my slides. Okay, can we see those? Is that all right, Rory?
Yep, you're golden.
Great, thank you. So thanks everyone for joining me today. I'm Rihanna. I'm at the end of my ECR period, I'd say, because I submitted my PhD, or my PhD thesis was conferred about 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. And I always used to enjoy coming to these early career talks when I was more junior or earlier in my career. And I was so excited when I got asked to give an early career talk that I said yes straight away, but I didn't really know what I was going to talk about. And I have a habit of saying yes to things without really knowing what they involve and then figuring out the details later. So I'm hoping that something I say you find useful and that you enjoy the talk that I'm about to give. I think it's very self-indulgent to talk about my history for half an hour, but hopefully you can take away something from it. So in the talk today, I've decided to reflect on my time as a PhD student and a postdoc in two key areas, which I hope will be useful to you all. The first being the day-to-day work involved in each of the roles that I've worked in, because I was always really curious about what this was like when I was studying or looking for jobs. What do these people actually do who are working in this area? And also the challenges that I faced. I guess maybe so you know that you're not alone when you face these kind of challenges. Maybe you can relate to some of them, maybe you can't. But at least to know that there is some hope that you get through these things. And I thought after that, that talking about the day-to-day monotony of my job and the challenges, it might be a little bit pessimistic. So I also decided to add some highlights from each of my roles as well. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my history. And so here's a timeline. I completed my Bachelor of Finance, Bachelor of Science double degree at the end of 2012, and then did an honours year in Maths and Statistics. After I completed my honours, I did a PhD in statistics for 3 years, 9 months and 11 days. Then did my first postdoc at the University of Melbourne. I was there for 2 years and moved into my second postdoc at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, where I am now. Actually looks like a really smooth transition from my study to my current role, but it took a really long time to realize that I was working towards a career in statistics. Even when I was doing my PhD, I wasn't sure it was going to lead me. And it wasn't until I got my first job at the University of Melbourne when my mum told me that she was really worried when I decided to do a PhD because she didn't know that I'd be able to find a job afterwards. And it was kind of like important because we didn't have any academics in my family. No one knew what a job as a statistician would involve, and I didn't even know that myself either, but I sort of took this risk and went ahead and did a PhD. Another thing that you would notice from this timeline is that I did all of my study in a row. So I did 9 years in a row with no real work experience in statistics during that time. And this has advantages and disadvantages. One main advantage being that I got it over and done with early. I don't have to worry about returning to study or the pay cut that comes with returning to study after a period of full-time work. But one of the major disadvantages is that I didn't have any practical experience working in this area. It makes it a bit more challenging when you're doing a PhD. I also didn't do a master's. I went straight from an honours to a PhD, which I could do at the time. So it kind of took a little bit more, I think, time for me to get in the swing of things with the PhD. I was pretty young and not really exposed to many of those kind of ideas, except through what I'd learned through my study. And I didn't even know that I wanted a career in that area. I just knew that I liked studying maths and I wanted to keep studying. So let me talk to you a little bit about what I did in my day-to-day role as a PhD student. So if you haven't done a PhD, or maybe if you're thinking about doing a PhD, it's probably key to know what is involved in doing a PhD. Really, the whole aim of it is to make a novel contribution to an area. My area was statistics, specifically statistical inference after model selection. And so some of my day-to-day research activities look like this. I did a lot of reading about my problem around in journal articles, books, websites, and so on. Did a lot of maths, which I don't think is particularly difficult maths. It's maths that we learn in first and second year of uni. So things like algebra, applying the law of total probability, using properties of expected value, variance, covariance, and working with matrices, matrix manipulations, things like that. Did a lot of programming, writing code to carry out computations, simulations, and to produce graphs. And so this was an area which I became more familiar with during my PhD. I wasn't a very good coder when I started, but by the end of it, I was much better. Did a lot of writing, notes and papers, and my thesis in LaTeX, group meetings and presentations, which really sort of only kicked off towards the end of my PhD when there were a number of students in my area. In addition to that, I was doing some teaching on the side, which in my first year sort of started off by running tutorials and marking assignments, doing one tutorial a week. And then I sort of took on a little bit more teaching because it paid pretty well and I was pretty happy with the pocket money. So then I started doing more teaching activities like doing student consultations, teaching, developing and creating teaching material, providing feedback for the people who are coordinating and teaching the subject, proofreading their exams, proofreading their assignments and things like that. In the third year of my PhD, I got an opportunity to do a little bit of lecturing, just a guest lecture here and there. And I coordinated my own subject, which was a very, very small subject with only 8 students at the pitched at the honours master's level. But it was a good experience. Wasn't any lecturing, but it was, organising materials, writing assignments and things like that. And then other things that we'd have monthly departmental seminars. And I also at some point picked up some research assistant work also for a little bit of extra pocket money. So this is really what my day-to-day activities look like during my PhD. And what are some of the challenges and highlights? Well, big challenges, there were a lot of challenges, I gotta say. And these are the kind of big ones that came to mind when I was thinking about them. Getting unstuck. Getting stuck happens a lot during your PhD or when you're studying. And getting unstuck can be really tough. I found that good kind of methods for getting unstuck were to try and explain the problem to someone else. Often I'd get stuck with my code. I remember early on when I wasn't as good with the programming, wasn't super experienced, I got stuck for about a month trying to find an error in my code. And so just running little chunks and checking to see it does what you expect it to do. So a really good way of getting unstuck there. And of course, seeking help. Had some challenge with motivation or procrastination during my PhD. I really when I started, I really kind of hit the ground running and was enjoying it, and would spend a lot of time very motivated, little procrastination. But as I progressed, I kind of dropped in the motivation and the procrastination increased. So one thing that I would try and do was just to set a manageable goal for each day to ensure that at least every day I made a little bit of progress. So example, I would try and type up a proof or write a program, code up a function or something, find and incorporate some papers into my literature review. And I found that since then, if I'm really struggling with my motivation, my procrastination, I just try and break a big task down into smaller chunks, because once you get the ball rolling, it's usually easier to build up the momentum. And there are other techniques that you can use for helping with this, the Pomodoro technique, for example, is very popular, where you spend a specified amount of time working and then you have a break. But I just found that this didn't really work for me, but might be helpful for other people. Another challenge for me was switching off. I would often find my mind buzzing at the end of the day, especially when I had a problem that I couldn't solve yet. I would just keep getting drawn back to that problem and thinking about it and dreaming about it sometimes. I still struggle with that, but now I think when I was working my first postdoc, I got into a good routine of doing some exercise and meditation before bed, which helped me to switch off. And now I kind of try to put the problem in context a little bit more. It's not super important in the context of my life. It's just minor problem with work. I'll deal with it tomorrow. Now's my time to rest. So still working on the challenge a little bit, but getting better at handling it. And another thing that I struggled with when I was doing my PhD was this feeling of being left behind and not being able to finish up. A lot of my friends were all working full time, and some of them were even going on long service leave, and I was yet to leave uni and start working full time. So I started to feel really left behind. And I also started to feel like I had a lot less in common with those people who were off, on their long service leave or buying houses or starting families. And I was just not at that stage in my life at all. And it made me feel like I was in a hurry to submit and to get my life really started. But I had achieved a lot during my PhD and didn't really know where to stop. And I was sort of had this pressure on myself to get everything done before I left. But luckily I applied for a job, which gave me a very harsh submission deadline for my PhD. That was a really great thing for me to do, because it meant that I got that in, I submitted it, and I was able to move on. Some of the great things about doing a PhD was solving puzzles. I love solving puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, escape rooms. I'm very obsessed with Harry Potter Lego on Switch right now. And the maths that I was doing during my PhD, it also felt like I was trying to do this solving puzzles, probably a little bit less fun than some of the other things that I do in my spare time, but still something that I was super engaged with and enjoyed. Another highlight is learning new things with time to learn them properly. Time's really a luxury during a PhD. You don't have to deal with a lot of the other administrative things that you do when you have a real job. So you get to really focus and learn things and focus on things that you're interested in and really delve deeper into them. Also, the culture at La Trobe was great. I really felt like I was part of the department. I had a really great PhD set up where I had an office, I had a computer, I had a whiteboard. Yeah, that was really nice of them. So I managed to get through my PhD. Here's me with the great man, my PhD supervisor, Paul Kabila, on my graduation day. I get to wear a floppy hat and the red robes. And I moved on to my first postdoc position, which was a teaching and research position in the Maths and Stats Learning Centre, which is in the School of Maths and Stats at the University of Melbourne. And this was a great first job coming out of my PhD. It was really a dream job of mine, a junior academic position, and doing a lot of teaching, doing research. And it was an absolutely fantastic team to work with, and I still catch up with them, members of the team, regularly. So what was it like doing a postdoc? A lot of the teaching was the same. So I've put these dot points here. The first 3 dot points are the same as what I was doing during my PhD experience, in terms of the teaching that I was involved in. And the extra thing that I hadn't done before was writing and marking exams and preparing subject scores, which were a bit more like administrative because of the coordination I was doing. So teaching was more of the same, and the teaching experience from my PhD was super helpful. But I have to say, at Uni Melbourne, it was on a much grander scale. So whereas our big subjects at La Trobe would get maybe a few hundred students, the big subjects at Uni Melbourne got thousands of students. And at Uni Melbourne, I was coordinating a subject, at La Trobe, I was coordinating a subject for 8 students. At Uni Melbourne, I was coordinating a subject for over 300 students. So it was just same sort of things, but on a much bigger scale. In terms of the research that I was doing, I was mostly finalising the PhD projects, the ones that I hadn't finished up because I got the job and decided to submit my PhD. So that was about like finalising these research papers that came about as a result of the projects that I was doing during my PhD. And I did a whole lot of other stuff as well, which I found really fun. I did a lot of outreach. I got involved with the Statistical Society of Australia, the Victorian branch. I helped out with a lot of science festival events. I volunteered at this Mathscraft workshop for teachers, which was really fun. And I helped coordinate our UniMel work experience program as well for the year 10s wanting to do work experience as a mathematician or a statistician. So those things were great experiences as well. And that's what it looked like. Those are the kind of things I'm doing on a day-to-day. So what were the challenges? Public speaking was tough for me. I still get nervous when I'm speaking. I've still got nervous before this talk today. And lecture preparation, I'm someone who just prepares a lot. If I feel like I have to do a public lecture or I have to do some sort of talk. So this was a real time sink. Doing new research I found was really tricky. I was embedded in a teaching team, and after I finished my PhD, I didn't feel ready to go off on my own yet. I was still developing my skills as an independent researcher, and I really needed the support of a research team or a research supervisor. And there was also this sort of feeling of inadequacy when I was teaching, because I was teaching biostatistics, and it was all the stuff that I taught before. And so I knew it all really, really well. And I was great at theory, and I really enjoyed teaching, but I didn't have any of this practical experience. I'd never done any of this stuff in practice. So it started feeling like a little bit of a fraud, and that was kind of always there eating away at the back of my mind. And some of the highlights, I'll come back to the challenges, but some of the highlights, my students were just the best. It was so much fun getting to know them. They really made me laugh. Every month we had our MSLC birthday babies events where our team would go for coffee and cake and sit down and have a chat and celebrate whoever's birthday it was that month. So we had a great we had a great team that I love being part of. And also our outreach events were a real highlight. Here's a photo of us. It's me here and some of the other staff members at the university. We entered into a students' maths competition for high schoolers, and we sorely lost. We were really terrible. These kids were really, really bright and really, really fast at maths. We were not very fast at all. So coming back to these challenges, the first challenge with public speaking I overcame. I became more confident and skilled with practice during the semester. I still get nervous, but I'm much better now than what I was previously. But the next two challenges I couldn't really overcome in that position. It really started eating away at me, that I didn't have this practical experience, that I didn't really know how to apply these concepts in practice. And teaching the same subjects again, I sort of felt like I wasn't getting the challenge that I wanted and the challenge that I liked from the research. And so I sort of had a bit of an existential crisis. And to deal with that, I decided to make a change. I was always interested in applying my skills in the medical field. And I was enjoying teaching my biostat subject and wanted to know how I could become a biostatistician. So I emailed a couple of people offering to buy them a coffee in exchange for some advice. And that's how I came to sit down one day with John Carlin, who at the time was the lead of the Clinical Epidemiology and Biostatistics Unit at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. And he told me about a postdoc that they were advertising. So I applied and I got the job, and I started working there in February 2020. So what does it look like at MCRI, my work on a day-to-day, every day? Well, I have a really nice balance at the moment, and I think it's something important to highlight because maybe not many jobs are able to strike such a good balance in the work. I roughly break down my role into research doing statistical methodology about half of my time, collaborative research in child health 2 days a week, and then a little bit of teaching of short courses as well. And I just want to say, like, my previous teaching and research experience have been really, really useful in this job as well. So things that I was learning in my PhD, things that I learned at UniMel, I was able to carry them across to this job with me. And so when I've written here in the research section, I've just put in bold the new stuff that I'm doing, but a lot of the stuff is the same, as you can see. So I'm still reading, have to do a lot of reading about my problem. I'm still doing maths, although I'm doing less theory than before. But the knowledge from my PhD has still been useful, especially for a lot of the computing that I'm doing. I'm still programming, I'm writing code to carry out computations, simulations, and graphs. At some point I discovered you could also write code to create tables, which is a much nicer way of doing it than what I was doing before, where I was doing a lot of manual entry of numbers doing my PhD, which is kind of, looking back, seems really stupid now. Also doing high performance computing, so working in a different computing environment. Still writing in LaTeX, but I'm actually, after using LaTeX almost all the time for 5 years straight, I've transitioned back to doing a lot more in Word, which was a bit strange at first, but actually a lot more convenient for my current job. And we still have the group meetings, presentations, and I also coordinate our little missing data group here at MCRI. In terms of my collaborative research in child health, I work with 2 different groups, 1 day a week with each of those groups. One of them does research into children born very preterm and very low birth weight, or preterm birth in general, and the other group does research on child respiratory health, so like lung function, and they have a lot of ongoing studies with kids with cystic fibrosis. So my role in those groups is to provide statistical support, for example, or in other words, to help them apply statistics to answer their research questions. And when I drill down into what I really do, I'm often advising on methodology, which usually comes back to advising on regression, researching how to answer questions when they ask me questions that I don't know the answer to, proofreading papers, grants, code, doing analyses myself, which often is just using regression in some form or the other, and attending their group meetings to make sure I'm across their projects, their studies, what stages they're up to, and what their plans are for their future as well. Once I started to believe in my ability to learn new things, I became a lot less worried about not knowing how to answer people's questions, because often they'll ask me something and I don't know it on the spot. So I need to go away and read up about it and research it, maybe talk to other people and come back to them with an answer. And that's completely okay. I think I'm much more comfortable with that now than what I was when I first started. And then the little bit of teaching I do a couple of, I coordinate a short course twice a year called Introduction to Biostatistics. And also involved with some of the teaching that's going on within the Victorian Centre for Biostatistics as well. Okay, so what are the challenges at MCRI? Well, I started 3 weeks before the pandemic, which meant that 3 weeks after I started, we were working from home. I didn't really know anyone, didn't really know my colleagues that well, and I found that kind of isolating. I didn't really know who to go to for support, but I got to say my supervisor is really great and supportive, and we were able to chat about it and put some pathways in place for getting support. There's been a steep learning curve. I had to learn about new research areas, both in my statistical methodology and in child health, which I like learning, but I think when everything is new, it's a bit hard to handle it all. I also had to learn new software. My collaborators are working a lot in Stata, whereas I'm very used to using R. So now I've kind of learned how to use Stata so I can help them. And, database software like RedCap, I'm still getting my head around that sometimes. And I feel like every time I was sort of comfortable and sort of felt like I was, when I felt like I was comfortable getting the swing of things, and something else would be thrown my way, and a new challenge, and I was like, what? Like, I don't know what's going on. And I'd have to spend some time like learning again. But I think after I've been here for 2.5, almost 3 years now. So now I feel like I'm okay again. I feel like I'm comfortable in the role and I know what I'm doing. There are a lot of competing projects. So at any one time, I'm involved with several ongoing projects, and people often coming to you asking for things, and you've got deadlines. So your own research can be pushed aside sometimes, so you can manage the stuff with deadlines, which is a bit challenging trying to juggle everything. And also we're a research institute. A lot of our funding comes from grants. And in that sense, that like most people, if not everyone at the research institute, is on short-term contracts. So there's always this, kind of idea, like I need to get some funding so I can stay on and do my research. Grants are very competitive. There are a lot of like superstars at MCRI, which is quite intimidating. But I do want to keep doing my work, so I've got to sort of apply and got to get in there and play the game a little bit. And then knowing that you might have job security for a couple of years, and then it's sort of a bit of a question mark again. So there's kind of always that challenge as well. I hope that makes sense. Please interrupt me if I'm not making sense. Some of the highlights, I finally found that supportive research environment that I was lacking when I was at the uni. I think the people that I'm working with are just fantastic. We have a great collaborative research environment. I feel much more confident in my career choice. I feel much more confident now in my decision to study my PhD. Previously, when I'm not questioning it so much anymore. I'm happy. I'm glad I made those decisions, even though I didn't know at the time what was going to come afterwards. And also travel. Travel's a real highlight. I just came back from a conference in the UK where I tacked on a trip to Spain and France on the end of it. And I'm hoping to get to do a lot more travel through my job as well. So I started this talk with a very clean education and work timeline. And I wanted to end with another timeline. It's a bit messier, as a reminder that career is important, but what happens outside your life is really important too. And when you're on a career trajectory like mine, you can get a bit stuck in a work bubble sometimes. But for me, my outside life has also consisted of a lot of challenges and highlights. I won't go through all of them, but from switching direction completely to my existential crisis, where I was questioning everything, questioning why I did a PhD, questioning, like, should I just give up, move to the beach and open a coffee shop, to my solo travel, and then recently found it, got engaged to my wonderful partner. So some highlights there. I want to say thank you to my colleagues, past and present. Without the support of these important people, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. And a few people in particular, Paul Kabila, my PhD supervisor, who really encouraged me to do a PhD in the first place. Be really grateful to him. And he's over here with, this is the La Trobe crew in the top left. This is the top right. This is our MSLC teaching team at the uni, having a coffee and cake for birthday babies catch up. So thank you to the MSLC. They were awesome team to be a part of. I learned a lot from them. And thank you to my academic mentor at the University of Melbourne, Yaban Chan, who is here in this very real photo, dressed up as Qui-Gon. And thank you to my current colleagues at MCRI. Here's a picture of us in the bottom here on our recent conference tour to Hadrian's Wall in the UK, and down here on the left when we were trying to socialize throughout the pandemic. I also want to say a special thank you to Catherine Lee, who's my supervisor at MCRI now, and she's been really great to work with. And also some of the other early career researchers who helped me brainstorm some ideas for this talk, Daisy, Rishani, and Melissa. Thank you guys. And I have to probably say one more thing. I am involved with the Statistical Society of Australia. I met a lot of people through this. I've attended a lot of events, and it's been a really great experience. So I encourage you, if you're not a member of the SSA, to think about joining. There's a full-time student membership for $20, and we've just recently introduced a new category of membership, which is the early career membership, which is half the price of a full membership. It comes with all the benefits, and I've listed some of the benefits here as well. All right, so that's it for me. Hopefully I've left plenty of time to have a chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that chat, for that talk, Rihanna. It was a really insightful way of gave us some really useful ideas of, I guess, another potential path people can take after the education. So yeah, really good. So we've got one question here that we hope you'd be able to answer. That is from Xi Ching Fu. Have you been to many conferences, and what role do these play in your development as an ECR?
I've been to a few conferences. I've been to my first conference I went to was a SSA conference. I think it would have been 2016 in Canberra, which was pretty memorable because when I was a PhD student at La Trobe, we weren't required to do a defense of a thesis or anything like that, but we did have to go and present at a conference. And so that was my conference that I had to present at as a PhD student. And I remember it being incredibly daunting and being a much larger audience than I was used to. But that was a good experience. Yeah, I've been to a few of the SSA conferences, which have been really great. I haven't been to any of the early career researcher conferences, but I found that the early career researcher day at the SSA has also been really good to get to know people, some of whom I've seen again over the years, catch up with it at various times. And I think the conference that I just went to, the ISCB one in Newcastle, was really great because I got to meet a lot of other researchers in my fields, that international collaborators, and some international collaborators and some people who are just in the field that I read a lot of their work. So that was really, really cool as well.
Awesome. There's one question here, but I think I have a question for you, which is in terms of identifying opportunities to take on postdocs, what was your avenue for finding those?
Well, I did say that I reached out to a few people when I knew that I wanted to make a job change. I kept an eye out on Seek as well, and things that were being advertised through through the university channels. So those were kind of the things that I looked at. Yeah, when I finished my PhD, I applied for 2 jobs. One was the one at UniMelb, which I got, and then went and did that job for a couple of years. But the other one, I didn't say this during my talk, but I actually applied for a job at MCRI at the time, which I was unsuccessful for. But that was just something that I found on Seek. So I find that keeping an eye out on those websites are pretty good. And sometimes there's internal communication that goes around, or even in newsletters and things like that.
Cool. Thank you. So we got a question from Alex Shaw. Just looking back, do you think doing undergrad to honours to PhD was an optimal choice, or would you advise to get some real world experience before going to the PhD?
I definitely think it was optimal, because even when I was doing my honours, I thought I was going to work in finance. And when I was doing my PhD, I had no idea what I was going to do. I think it is useful to get some real world experience, but then you do have this thing of that once you start working in the real world and earning real world money, it can be hard to go back to study. So there's kind of advantages and disadvantages of both. Yeah, my path definitely wasn't optimal. I was just kind of following the opportunities as they presented themselves, and sort of, I think I kind of went like this a little bit, and now I'm kind of narrowing in a little bit more on what it is that I'll end up doing for the rest of my career.
Yeah, that's cool. So we've also got a question here from Kylie Lung, which is, how closely is the research topic of your current postdoc related to previous PhD research? And alongside that, how much did the research topic make you interested in the position versus the people or environment, etc.?
That's a great question. So the first part, it's not very related at all. So my PhD topic was statistical inference after model selection, database model selection. And my current topic is missing data using primarily multiple imputation methods. So these are kind of different things. But I think in terms of the skills, there's a lot of crossover in the skills in terms of reading literature, academic writing, programming. There's a lot of crossover there. And there's a bit of crossover also in Some of the more theoretical stuff, like I use a lot of conditional probability, and just things that I picked up along the way during my PhD, I think has actually helped me. I don't know, it's kind of like all sort of builds on each other in a way. And then the second part of your question, how much did the research topic make you interested in the position versus the people and environment? I was kind of looking for, when I made that move, I was kind of looking for a position in health or medical research where I could do something applied. That was kind of my main motivator. I really wanted to get that practical experience, and some research on the side would have been great as well. And I kind of came across this position where, yeah, it's research and it's applied, and it's kind of a really nice balance. I also am really fortunate to be working with some real big guns like John Carlin, Kate Lee, and Margarita at Cebu, who are really like leading researchers in their fields. So I was kind of attracted to these people as well, to be working in this environment and in working with these big names. I hope that answers that. Sorry, I have a habit of going off on tangents sometimes.
Seems to have done the job. Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions? We'll just keep an eye on the chat. But in the meantime, I will, for those that are still attending, just like to have a couple of mentions. So we will firstly say that this seminar series will be back in the new year. The details of who will be speaking and the topics. Well, thank you, G, for putting that out. Will be mentioned up in the socials moving forward. We'd also like to make a plug for the Early Career and Student Statisticians mini conference that's coming up next month. So this is taking place from the 15th to the 17th of November. So this is an event that's jointly hosted by Western Australia branch of the Stat Society of Australia, the SSA Early Career and Student Statistician Society or Network, and also the NZSA branch of this too. And finally, for those that are based in New Zealand, predominantly Auckland, we have for those attending the unconference, there is going to be a meetup for the Early Career and Student Statisticians on the night of the 21st of November, taking place at My Barn, Auckland at 6 p.m. So we'll be sending out details for all of these soon. Other than that, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to call it there and say once again, thank you, Rihanna, for this fantastic talk.